This week on The Futurists, Jeff Jarvis.
You have to ask a question. Can I be in charge of this technology? Can I be the boss of it? Can I benefit from that? Or is it going to replace me and there's no hope?
Hey there, welcome back to The Futurists. I'm Rob Tercek, and this week we've got a returning guest, someone I enjoy speaking to so much because we both share a passionate interest in history and how history influences not just the moment we live in, but the moments that are about to come. And in the past, this guest has teased me mercilessly about the title of the podcast because, in his opinion, calling yourself a futurist is pretentious. I can't really argue with that. I think I wear that label. Welcome back to The Futurist, Jeff Jarvis, and thank you for holding your nose and being on a show called The Futurists.
Thank you for forgiving me, my friend.
I'm super happy to have you back. I always enjoy our chats, even when we're not recording them, because I come away with fresh perspectives on things. And
Same
this
back.
week is, oh, thank you for that. This week is no exception. You just sent across a copy of your newest book. I have to say, you're the most prolific writer I know because you keep sending me copies of new books. And folks who are listening, maybe folks who are watching, this book is called Hot Type. And Jeff just finished it. I think, when's it coming out, Jeff, Hot Type?
In August 20th.
Okay, so next month it'll be released. It's fantastic. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed it. And I don't say that in any gratuitous way. I do read the books that when we interview someone on the show, I do read the books. I haven't finished Jeff's book, but that's because it's so much fun to read. I'm taking my time. I'm not racing through it with an artificial deadline. I want to enjoy every word. His descriptions of people, his way to characterize how they were motivated and their concerns, the world that they lived in. He's able to evoke all of that. Now, the funny thing about this, Jeff, is you're writing about, this is going to land so awkwardly on the show. You're writing about the Linotype machine, and I'm sure people are going to listen and go like, "Wait, wasn't that 100 years ago?" And the answer is yes, but it shaped so much of the world that we're in. It kind of built the fishbowl, the media fishbowl that we swim in to this day. That we're kind of disassembling right now. So help me with that a little bit. Give me a sense of Hot Type and the story of Ottmar Mergenthaler.
So what fascinates me is mass media. I've devoted my life and career to it. I have regrets as a result, and I try to understand it. About 15 years ago, I wanted to write a book about mass media, and I read a bunch of sociology. I'm a fake academic. I'm not a real one. I snuck in through the side door called journalism. And I started writing the first few pages, and I said, I'm not ready for this. I don't know enough. I can't do it. And so I had to start studying more history. I read Elizabeth Eisenstein's The Printing Press as an Agent of Change, and I was enthralled. And I followed rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole and just loved it. And ended up writing a book called The Gutenberg Parenthesis, which we've talked about, which is really about the beginnings of movable type.
Yep.
And then I wrote a little book about magazines and their business models. And then this one is about the last machine that was needed to open the door to mass media and full scale of media. And in the 19th century, basically setting type had not changed since the 1450s in Gutenberg. I hold in my hand a piece of type, and it's awe-inspiring to realize that every word in every language that was set in type had to be set one damn letter at a time. It was a slow process. It was laborious. It required knowledge of language to be able to hyphenate and justify. It had the really boring task of putting the clean type back in so it can be reused because it was very expensive to make this stuff. So what happened in the 19th century is new technologies came along that changed publishing. First was the steel press. It was just less creaky than the wooden press. Then stereotyping, which was being able to mold a page of type so that you didn't have to reset the type every time if a new edition came along. That changed the economics of publishing. Then paper made from wood pulp rather than from fabric. Also the telegraph came along in this period. And then the steam-powered press, which was critically important. The average circulation of a daily paper in the U.S. before the mechanization and industrialization of print was only 4,000. It was a Substack newsletter, and a small one at that, right? But so scale, you could see scale. However, there was one thing that stood in the way of that progress, and that was the typesetter setting type one damned letter at a time. And to just set a fat paragraph could take 2 hours. In a New York newspaper, you had a composing room filled with 100 compositors at their desks, standing desks, setting type. It was incredibly expensive. So the world wanted a machine to automate this. We could make a sewing machine. We could make a telephone. Why can't we make a typesetting machine? There were 300 attempts to do that, at least patented attempts, all failures for various reasons, because they all tried to replicate what they knew. Most of them were printers who tried to replicate the task of making the type or composing the type, or most of them didn't even try to automate hyphenation and justification because that required too much brain power. Mark Twain said that any machine that could do this had to have a brain and think, or else it wouldn't work. Or finally redistributing the type. So this was the one thing that was needed to allow mass media to grow, for the scale of media to grow. I thought I was going to write a biography of Ottmar Morgenthaler. He's a German watchmaker who came over, he created the successful machine, but bad for him and bad for me, he died young. So I dug down a through the rabbit holes, and I found all these just great stories that all kind of come together. The typewriter was a necessary precursor to the typesetting machine. One, because we got used to this idea of printing with type and the need for the keyboard. Most of the original typesetting machines used harpsichord keyboards because that's the only keyboard we knew. Also, the guy who inspired the Linotype, one of my favorite stories is a guy named James O'Clefane, who was the fastest, best stenographer in Washington. He served Lincoln's cabinet. And fascinating, what he cared about in life was, as a stenographer, if you think about it, the only way you could record an event was by somebody taking a pen to paper, a quill to paper. And so he always wanted to make that faster. So he tested the first typewriters, and he invested in a competitor to Edison's gramophone, the graphophone, and became a director of the company that would become CBS Records. He inspired the Linotype. So there's a linkage there. So you go through all the failures, you go through everything that Clefane did, you go through Morgenthaler's eureka moments, and then you have the thing that doesn't set type a letter at a time, it sets it a line at a time. And I have in my hand a piece of lead type. And that made all the difference. That made it possible to produce media and content faster and cheaper, and that's what made first more newspapers, and then they consolidated in corporatization, and it made them fatter, and it made magazines easier to make, and it made books cheaper to make, and it changed media and changed culture as a result. So that's fascinating to me. But what's really interesting to me is, because I care about mass media, is, and I'm on a show about future, what lessons might we have out of this for the future? And we can talk about that. There's a few there in terms of who succeeded and who failed in this huge change, and what lessons might we have in the story of labor. And then finally, where my whole story ends, I didn't expect this to happen at all, is the fascinating story of the creation of PostScript and everything that came out of that.
Great. Well, the book is terrific, and I've, as I said earlier, I've enjoyed every moment of it. But I'm also smiling while we're talking about these things. You covered so many different topics, and each of them I want to unpack, because the way I understood it is that these are each one of these steps in the process of inventing the Linotype machine was an obstacle. There's an obstacle to progress. And the interesting thing about that is people can't see what's on the other side of solving that problem. They know they want to solve it. You're right. There's tremendous demand for it, right? And I was thinking, as you're saying, like, imagine, the Lincoln Douglas debates, there was someone with a quill pen trying to transcribe those with a freaking feather, right, dipped in ink, because that was the fastest that we had, right? We all know about railroads and the change, for thousands of years before the railroad, the fastest way to get around was either a sailboat or a horse. And now suddenly you could go 3 to 10 times faster with a railroad. That was a gigantic change at the same time. But you can imagine how people felt constrained by this notion of, like, transcribing with a pen, a quill pen, the words of someone who could speak much faster. And of course, in those days, the Lincoln Douglas debates were hours and hours long. So that would be an awful lot of pages to transcribe. Talk about writer's cramp. So the demand was there. But what we couldn't see was what was on the other side. And what's on the other side is a complete reorganization, right? And my thinking these days is find the cheap resource. Whatever the cheap resource is, the entire economy and society are going to reorganize around the cheap resource. And so, the railroad made distance cheap Distance used to be expensive, but then the railroad made distance relatively cheap, and suddenly you had national markets, and you were able to grow, wheat in one part of the country and ship it across the country, or you could have
Sell national
cows.
brands. Suddenly it was the creation of the brand.
Exactly. And as a consequence of that, you need a way to advertise national brands. Hence, there was a need for mass media and so on. And so what the typesetting did, it made written words cheap. And thereby, Jevon's paradox, we consume more.
Yes.
Which is the paradox, right? You think it makes it cheap, oh, you're going to commoditize it. No, that doesn't work like that. It never works like that. Whatever the cheap resource is, we consume more of it. Then there's all sorts of complementary things that arise around that where you can make business, make money, repackaging cheap type into different formats. Okay, that's the magazine business that you've been in your entire career. I bring that up because as a link to kind of the present and a topic that comes up perennially on this show, is artificial intelligence. And so the question we have to ask is, okay, if the train made distance cheap and typesetting made words on print cheap, what does AI make cheap? And the answer is cognition. It's making cognition cheap. And now that scares a hell of a lot of people because smart people like you and me feel like that's a direct threat to what we do for a living. But I don't think it is. I think there's something else that humans do, which is discernment, judgment, wisdom, the ability to distinguish between good product and bad product, or good output and bad output. So, the machine might commoditize the task of making a PowerPoint presentation, reduce that cost to zero, but it's going to require a human being to discern whether or not that's actually valuable, if it's accurate, and if it's a useful deck, or if it's full of errors. So anyway, that's kind of the big frame here. Is I think there is a parallel. But what I'm really interested in right now is the before and after, because the after is so unexpected, and the scale is always much bigger than anyone can possibly anticipate. We can only anticipate a projection of what we currently are doing, so it's really hard to imagine a gigantic leap in terms of productivity and output. But that's exactly what happened in the age of print. You just characterized it. The part about the typewriter was the part that I really enjoyed. That I have read, and I enjoyed the heck out of it because it never crossed my mind. Like, oh, yes, of course, there was going to be a long, painful period of trial and error. And I remember very clearly because I learned how to type when I was like 14, and typewriters used to get jammed up even then, right? It was a clumsy mechanical machine. But the part I like the best is your anecdote that it was based on the piano, that the piano was an inspiration. Now, I'm a piano player. I have a beautiful grand piano in my house, and I've always admired it as a work of art because it's a wooden machine. It's a really complicated, intricate, beautifully made wooden machine that hasn't changed materially in 200 or 300 years in terms of how it works. But inside, there are these exquisitely balanced hammers. It's very delicate machinery, but all made by hand and all made out of wood. There's metal fastenings, but the rest of it is all wood. The hammers and the felts are felt. And how interesting that was the model they had. Tap a key and then somewhere else, a hammer falls, and it's going to make an
fall.
impression.
Actually, importantly, it rose.
It rose up like a piano,
and it hit from underneath. And so the first typewriters, you couldn't read what you were typing. Thus, the invention of the typo.
And then they had to invent the ribbon, right? So it wasn't a carbon paper. Like a sequence of innovations, what Stephen Johnson calls the adjacent possible, each innovation opening up the path to the next series of innovations, and then cumulatively we get this gigantic change. But that was a long process, the typewriter. And then the part about Thomas Edison there also inspired me, where he, the inventor of the typewriter took it to Edison, and then there's kind of a garbled history there of whether or not Edison stole the invention or not, but somehow magically Edison started making typing machines at the end of telegraphs. And of course, that made a ton of sense because, again, imagine that person sitting in a telegraph office in a railroad station in 1880, hand writing, like whatever shorthand they had, as these dots and dashes came across the telegraph wire. So it's funny. And in many cases, what we're talking about is a human transcribing. It's sort of like a biological robot, right? It's like a human is just doing the mechanical task of transcribing information from one format to another in a painful way. So at any rate, for folks who are interested in that kind of transmutation and then the history, the progression, for sure, Hot Type is a fun read, and I encourage you to check it out. What lessons are there for us today?
I think where you started to head there is really interesting. Is when we the unanticipated part of this change. Mm-hmm. So one thing is, I think we can understand today what it's like to have a sudden avalanche of more speech, more text. Right? It happened with Gutenberg, obviously. You've got tons more books at a far lower price than you could have imagined, and Lord knows that changed the world. I'm not a technological determinist. It was not set in stone how it would change,
Yeah.
but it changed obviously in
Well,
considerable
it
ways.
unfolded in different ways in different cultures, right?
Exactly.
In the Muslim world, it was forbidden for hundreds of years, and they didn't have type, and as a result, they have this beautiful calligraphic culture.
Right. Exactly.
But in some respects, their scientific literature fell away because they weren't able to produce it fast enough.
Where they had been leaders in science, and in the so-called West, it didn't cause the Reformation, but if Luther didn't have print, he wouldn't have been able to cause the Reformation. A. B. He probably wouldn't have burned the stake like Jan Hus, his predecessor. And C. He made a very important decision to write in German and create a public around that rather than in Latin. Anyway, so that was an avalanche of text. Then we get into the 19th century with steam-powered presses and then the linotype, and a whole bunch more text comes along, and that frightens people. It causes moral panic. The fear was that novels would corrupt the morals of women and children, that these new art forms were coming out, and they're not appreciated. That's one change. The other fascinating thing to me, Robert, was the inability at each of these changes to figure out the business model at first. Mm-hmm. In the case of Gutenberg, year 1500, all the printers were failing. They printed the wrong stuff. They were misery. In fact, it was Martin Luther who saved them as a business. You get to the 19th century, and if there's a villain in my tale, it's a guy named Whitlaw Reid, who stole the the progressive New York Tribune out from under its founder Horace Greeley, who didn't say "Go West, young man," and as far as we know. Who also basically forced Mergenthaler out of the company that bore his name, and who used the Linotype to get union typesetters out of his composing room. And so you can look upon him as a villain, but in truth, he was also just a capitalist. And he was a first early capitalist, and he was a businessman's businessman. He understood the need of capital to buy these machines. He understood the need for scale to do that. He understood the power of equity to own it. What he didn't understand was the power of advertising. And he gave a speech in, I think it was 1879, before the Linotype, saying newspapers have as many ads and as many pages as they're going to have. People are not going to tolerate turning more pages to get to the stuff they want. The advertisers can't afford large audiences in this way. It ain't going to be advertising that way, folks, right? So the old paywall versus advertising fight, right? Even then. Magazines, the real business of mass media, the attention economy came from a guy named Frank Munsey, who had a magazine egotistically named Munsey's, who one day in the 1890s decided to sell it at a loss, at a dime, losing money on each copy. How did he make it up? Advertising. That changed all of media from then to today. That's the attention economy. Books. Mark Twain, who's kind of the Zelig in this tale, he goes back again and again and again.
That's right.
The way his books were sold originally was the way, not all books, but a great majority of the books were sold at the time was through subscription sales. And so you imagine a door-to-door salesperson sticking their foot in the door in Podunk, Iowa, to sell you literature, to sell you culture, and Mark Twain with a little sample of the book, and look at these beautiful illustrations so you can get your own leather cover. And every book was a coffee table book because you bought this expensive thing to show your erudition. And Twain is a major part of the story because he invested in a competitor to the Linotype called the Page. And he lost his fortune and his wife's fortune. And because of that, he decided to become a publisher. And at first it was successful. Then they made terrible decisions. And he went bankrupt. And he had to go on a world tour to make up the money that he lost for all of his investors. He paid them all back, and then he ended up life fine. But none of them understood what the business model of mass media would be. It was not self-evident.
Yeah.
And so I think we get now to AI. There's many lessons for us. One is that we continue to see the future in the analog of the past, so we still think of things as content. We still think of them as pages and publications. We haven't broken out of these models in ways. And I talk to newspaper people, and they think about articles. And I say, no, you got to start thinking about databases. Every menu in town, and who has empanadas today, and different ways to communicate. The town meeting can now be transcribed, and I can make it searchable, and I can make a podcast out of it. And we have to really rethink the forms here. And we have to rethink this idea of publishing and content being a one-way street. The internet does that for us. Come AI, now, and I just had this discussion with somebody I really admire in my field right before coming on. I think that AI can stretch our definition of literacy. In that, you and I are writers, and we're not. It's not. We like to complain about it. We like to say, "Oh, you don't know how hard it is to write. Oh, it's tough. It's you face the blank page or screen, and it's hard." But the truth is, we like it. We do it. We know how to do it. A lot of people are intimidated by writing. Or by illustration. I can't draw with a crap, and I'm embarrassed to sit before you with your wonderful art there. I can't make video, and you know how to do that, right? So there are various literacies that we have. And AI potentially, I think, can help people express themselves better the way they want to.
At a minimum, it's going to bring a floor, right? You figure 8 billion people on the planet, and half of them are below average in terms of self-expression. Well, those folks could benefit from AI, and it'll raise the floor, right? It might not.
There's caution there.
There's a ceiling, right? If you're talented, you're going to be able. There's no ceiling. There's no limit. But the basic minimum skill set is going to go up. I think that's pretty good, given the volume of emails and texts that are being sent around the world. Why not use AI to make them better?
Yeah, and so I think it takes away some of the drudgery stuff that we do, and so on and so forth. So what do we do about that? How do we see our culture in that moment? And then we have fear about the business model. Well, again, look back. People come to me all the time online and say, "Well, how are we going to support the journalism that was?" I don't care. I don't want to support what was.
Well, the answer might be we don't. The answer might be that goes away, right? That thing goes away. It's a funny thing. Someone has said this phrase. I wish I couldn't put my finger on it. The future doesn't fit in the containers of the past, but it's so appropriate to what you're describing now. And you're right. We've been habituated because we are the goldfish that swim in this particular, fishbowl. The mass media environment that we're raised in, we can't perceive past the objects that we were raised to understand. How you get information is a magazine, a newspaper, a book, and online, basically, they're just replicas of that. They're containers that echo those containers of the past. But what you're describing now is something that's not fixed. It's infinite and growing. There's a couple data points to support what you're saying. So the first one is the sales of nonfiction business books are down by 30% or more. And no one's basically, buyers are going on strike. Why? Because they can talk to ChatGPT and get career advice, and they turn ChatGPT into a kind of coach or advisor or consultant that guides them. Well, that's better. First of all, it's tailored to you, so that makes it much more valuable. And it's instant. Also, it's free. So, why would I go buy a book? So Tim Ferriss, who wrote The 4-Hour Workweek, said it's over. That category of book is finished. It's dead and done. And he, like you, said you have to shift to databases. Yeah, there's another recent data point to support that as well. So there's a website called The Numbers, and it is a database. It's the numbers box office of weekend. So what happened with the box office for movies every weekend, and that is what everybody refers to as kind of like the benchmark, the gold standard for information about what's happening in the movie business. Well, these prediction markets like Kalshi have now got automated systems that ping the numbers constantly to get real-time data. And what they're trying to do, apparently, is get ahead of it so they can get the numbers a little bit in advance, because, of course, that would confer a massive advantage if you're placing a bet on a movie's opening weekend on a prediction market. If you got a little inside information, you could make a huge killing on that, right? And so they've broken the numbers. They've broken this website because the people are using bots to kind of try to get into the workflow and so on. And I guess, I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's kind of a consequence of this turmoil that we're in right now. But the point we're making is, and I think we're sharing this, is when you commit an idea to print, it's fixed, right? That's how copyright works. That's the definition of a copyrightable idea. It's fixed in a medium. And what you're describing now is with AI, ideas will no longer be fixed. They'll be fluid. They'll be living. They'll be responsive. They'll be something you can interact with, you can share, you can add to, you can maybe take away from. That's a complicated idea that we haven't really fully got our heads wrapped around yet. I don't, you don't, nobody listening to this show does yet, but that's clearly what's happening. You can see evidence of it every day. Surely the business models are going to change, and that's scary because no one knows what the next business model is going to be. The only thing I can say is, man, that is a much more valuable resource than a book. Because the reality is most business books you don't finish, right? You read the first chapter, okay, that could have been a good article in a magazine like Vanity Fair. I don't really need to read the next 10 chapters. They're just there to fill the book out so that they can take up shelf space. And then the book sits on my shelf until I finally come around to going, I don't need this, and throw it out.
And even the used bookstore won't take it anymore.
Nobody
It's a
wants
business book. Yep.
Exactly. And it's atoms, not bits, right? So imagine how much more valuable that would be as something I could reference, cross-reference. And now I think, well, okay, I have hundreds of ebooks on my Kindle, on my Kindle app. These are digital books, but they're completely walled off. Completely walled off from anything I might want to do with them. I can't reference them. I can't scan them. I can't index them. They're just these kind of dumb digital objects on my phone, and I can't use them in any way in my work. So effectively, they're just digital replicas of the stuff that's just sitting on my shelf that I don't consult either. And I kind of quite haven't figured out my workflow around that, right? So just imagine in this vital world that we're in now, this highly dynamic environment that we're in now, if all that information were available as a database, and if there were a business model to support it, you can imagine the number of transactions of content transactions that would occur. It wouldn't double, it wouldn't triple, it wouldn't quadruple. It would go up by a factor of like 23,000 in a matter of weeks, right? Because you'd have this intense take-up of interactions. So I suspect that's where we're going. I'm not quite sure if that's where you wanted to go with this conversation.
So no, exactly where I want to go. So let me do a quick story. So when I recorded the audiobooks for the last two, for Magazine and Hot Type, at the end you do the this production has been whatever, right? And there's a paragraph that I was supposed to read that says, no one may use this in this universe or the next universe in any way, in AI or any crap. You can't do it. And I said, that can't come out of my mouth. It won't come out of my voice. No, I'm sorry, I can't say that.
Wow.
So I offered the publisher two options. One is I said I recorded an alternative. Though the author disagrees, no one may use this. And they wouldn't do that, right? So they put in somebody else's voice. That's fine.
Okay.
Right. But I'm also editing a new book series called Intelligence, AI, and Humanity for Bloomsbury, for the same publisher. And I'm trying to say, we've got to figure out a different perspective toward AI if we're doing a book series on AI. And to demonstrate that, I took my 3 Bloomsbury manuscripts and I put them in Notebook LM, now called Gemini Notebook. They changed the name last week. And, created the Jeff bot. And so I'm not making it public yet because it'll probably freak out the publisher. But the point is, you can enter into a dialogue. Because Notebook LM is limited to what you give it, you can enter into a dialogue with it on the outside. And so my book could live on in a slightly different way. So explain this to me, or why did this happen then, or who disagreed with this, or find things that are in there. And I think that that's going to be important as a new means of discovery for authors. So you might write, a friend of mine named Mark is writing a book about getting a job in the age of AI, and it may be a book, but he should go to the next step and put it in a place like Notebook LM so people can query it and have a dialogue with it, and then he creates that value. I want to tell a quick story here about change, because I think it's illustrative for where we're going. I didn't expect the story of labor to be such a big part of this book. I knew it'd be part of it, obviously, because you have typesetters who've been doing this for years. There's 100 of them in the Tribune news composing room. What happens to them? And did they hate the typesetter? Some did. The older among them said, I'm never going to get used to this crap, and left it. Fascinating little side story. I don't know if you've gotten to this part yet. There were typesetters called the Swifts. They were the fastest, most competent typesetters there were, and they turned typesetting into a spectator sport. It was like bowling or golf. People came and they spent money to watch people set type. The International Typographical Union at some point stopped them and forbade it because they didn't want a John Henry fight, a man v. machine, because they would have lost. Anyway, the ITU, the International Typographical Union, was the oldest organized union in America. When the typesetter came along in the 1880s, 1886 is when it was installed in the New York Tribune, there had been 300 failures before. They kind of shrugged at it. But the word had it this Linotype was better. We can get into what made it better in a minute. But they knew that it was out there. They had spies in the non-union New York Tribune composing room to see what it was. They had people come back and do diagrams and explain it and bring back slugs of type to show it. And so they knew it was inevitable. They knew the machine to replace their work had finally been created. It had flaws, but it was nearly there. So you would think that the union would have fought tooth and nail. They would have followed the example of Captain Swing against the Thresher, or Luddites against the Loom, who, by the way, weren't really so much against technology. They were against feudal factory work. But Put that aside. But having learned the lesson of the pressmen, the typesetters, the ITU said, okay, you can have your machine. One condition is that we run it. We are the typesetters. We still do it. They lost 30,000 jobs in the first 5 years. They gained them back in 5 years. And then they grew huge. And so it's a really important lesson, I think, to say that they, rather than fighting the technology, they said, we are going to take charge of the technology. Mm-hmm. And I think that's potentially a lesson in there for AI, for many of us, to say, I'm not going to fight the AI. I'm going to use it to my benefit because I have an expertise and I'm going to do this.
But I'm the one directing it. I'm not subject to it. I'm object. Yeah.
However, then along in the 1960s and 70s came new technologies. One, believe it or not, was the punch tape that was used for telegraphs and teletypes and such. So it was the keyboard on one end would drive the machine on the other end through punched paper tape, and the code that enabled, the Baudot code that enabled that. Well, somebody came along, Frank Gannett, who was from the Gannett newspaper chain, came in and said, why couldn't it run Linotype too? And he came into an inventor who'd invented the teletypewriter, and thus was created the teletypesetter, and they created an add-on on the Linotype. And if you had things like stock tables or sports scores, it could run through because it knew how to set the type. However, you couldn't put just a plain article through it because you had to hyphenate and justify the type. It had to know what type size it was, how wide it was, where the breaks were, and so on and so forth. And so the typesetters were frightened to death of this, but there was kind of a limit to what it could do. Then came the computer, the RCA 301, which was able to take in a paper tape of a plain article, just plain text, and hyphenate and justify it, having been set to the right type and the right column width. And then that could run the Linotype, and you could have one typesetter running 3 machines at once. This freaked the typesetters, and they saw that attrition was coming. And because they were so powerful, Big Six it was called in New York, the local, because it was so powerful, they insisted that there would be no attrition, and they wanted savings to come to them to retrain people. However, with no attrition, there was no savings. And so this led to strikes in the 1960s with 6 of 9 newspapers dying. Because now not only was paper tape driving Linotypes, it was also driving a new technology called cold type, which rather than molding type in lead, the materiality was gone, and now letters were made by shining light through clear letters on a black background onto photographic film or paper. And it was developed, and you had type, and you'd cut it up and you put it out there. And so the typesetters fought this. It led to the strike. It led to killing 6 of 9 newspapers in New York City. Wow. After that strike, Bert Powers, who was the head of the union at Big Six in New York, saw the RCA 301 operating. And he said, oh, hell, 3 of these machines could set all the type in New York.
Yeah.
And he realized then that they were doomed. And so he changed his union strategy, too late for those 6 newspapers, to say, I know this stuff is coming in. It's inevitable. We're out of jobs. And so now I want lifetime job guarantees. And the last typesetter who was covered by that lifetime job guarantee retired from the New York Times in, I think, 2012. And the union died, and the composing rooms died. They died next because PostScript was invented. And PostScript was a way to describe a letter or an image in a way that would be the same on your screen, on a piece of paper, wherever you did
basically
it in a PDF.
Mathematical representation of an image of a letter.
Exactly.
So
Bezier
it could
curves.
scale up and down, and it would stay, all the curves would stay precise.
The curves were invented by French automakers to describe shapes.
I hate to interrupt you, but I have to go to a break, so we're going to take a little break. Folks, you're listening to The Futurists. I'm Rob Tercek, and this week I'm talking to Jeff Jarvis about his newest book, Hot Type, which is fabulous and full of insights like the ones you've been hearing. Stay tuned. We're going to be right back after this.
Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. For information about all our podcasts, go to Provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show.
Hey, welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tercek, and this week I'm talking to my friend Jeff Jarvis about his new book, Hot Type, and we're going to pick it up right where we left off before the break. And so, Jeff, you just gave us a mini history of the Typesetters Union. Amazingly, the oldest union and very long-standing, in spite of all the challenges and all the automation that occurred. It was a very durable organization with its last member retiring in 2012, long past the point when the machines themselves have been replaced. What can we take away from that story for today as we cross this threshold into the age of AI?
I think it depends upon the technology and the moment, but you have to ask a question. Can I be in charge of this technology? Can I be the boss of it? Can I benefit from that? Or is it going to replace me and there's no hope? So either I learn how to take charge of it or I better learn something new.
So, in 2023, we had this experience. I had it firsthand here because I live not far from Netflix's headquarters in Hollywood. And there was a strike every day for 6 months where the Writers Union and the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild were marching in solidarity to protest, the contract that they were asked to sign at that time. But more importantly, one of the core ideas, more relevant to our talk here today, one of the core issues was artificial intelligence. It remains a thorny issue, but at that time, the writers were dead set against it because they understood it as a kind of zero-sum game. It's either me or AI. The scary scenario for them was that, some producer could be driving into his office from Malibu and get on the mobile phone and shout at his assistant, "I need you to set me up with a script for a 2-person buddy comedy. We have some actors coming in this afternoon, and I want to have a script ready for them." And then the fear is that the AI would just crank out a completely mediocre script. They get a commitment from that actor to do it, and then they would hire a writer at 25% of the price of an original screenplay and hire them to do a rewrite of an AI-generated script. So that was a scary scenario. That was a very contentious strike. It lasted for 6 months. It brought many writers to the brink of bankruptcy because they were living on whatever they had, and we don't have residuals and royalties anymore, so those savings got dwindled very quickly. So then we had a repeat of that scenario. We thought we were going to repeat the whole thing again this spring because the contract was a 3-year contract. So here we are in the spring of 2023, and everyone was wondering, are the writers going to go on strike again? And this time, Jeff, we didn't have a strike. In fact, they were able to come to an agreement with the producers in a matter of weeks, which stunned me because I know how hard set against AI and automation this particular union is. But what they got is what they needed. They got to be in charge, to your point. They're the ones that get to use the AI if they wish. And what's happened in the meantime since 2023 and 2026 is that most writers took a good hard look at ChatGPT eventually. They overcame their aversion, took a look at it and realized it's not that great. It's kind of a mid technology. If you're a good writer, it's okay. It can be helpful. It can speed up some cycles. It might be able to do research. It might be kind of an unreliable but clever assistant. But what it isn't going to do is supplant a good writer. And so now they feel more confident saying, okay, yeah, we'll accept AI, but on our terms. It's exactly what you just said about the typesetters. It seems so similar to me that we're repeating the process. This illustrates one of the key points, one of the reasons I love talking to you. Most futurists don't spend enough time thinking about history because we keep learning the same lessons again and again and again. And the world has a habit of giving us the same lesson until we get it right. And here we are going through another major technology shift. And we all tell us, the conceit of the permanent present is that what we're experiencing is unique and this moment has never been experienced by humanity before. It's just not true. What your book shows us is again and again and again, the same problems come up in novel configurations. But the same problems keep coming up. The same question gets posed again and again. And it's up to us to come up with a better, more durable answer. So I think there's a great deal for people who are concerned about AI and the future of jobs. There's a great deal of value in reading Hot Type because you'll see that this is not a novel set of problems that we're confronted with. You'll see the parallels as clearly as Jeff and I do. And I'm not even halfway through the book yet. And I'm telling you that there's a lot of takeaway value in the part that I've read. Well, there you go.
There's other funny stories. So there's also the business of making pieces of type, which you think would have gone away with the typesetter. Fascinating, quick little hits there. So what made the Linotype different, what made it successful, is that Otmar Mergenthaler was not a printer. He didn't have ink in his veins. He was a watchmaker from Germany. He knew nothing about it. James Clefane came to him with a machine that he thought was going to work at one model. Mergenthaler worked in a company in Washington that made models and for inventors who had to have models of their patents, among other things. And so he came to this shop, and Mergenthaler fixed that effort, but said, "This isn't going to work. He's not going to do it." And they went through one or other, two more models. They went through more failures, which you have to go through. But then he had true eureka moments, which are rare, but he really had them. And he realized that what he should do was eliminate all four pieces of setting type. Founding the type, composing the type, hyphenating and justifying the type, and redistributing the type back. So he decided he was going to mold type a letter at a time. And he created a matrix. And the matrix is a mold, a die, and each one for each letter. And when you hit a keyboard, a letter on the keyboard, and Linotype still exists in many printing museums. There's one in California. There's one in Massachusetts. I recommend going to see it. You hit the letter, down comes the mold, the next mold, the next mold, the next mold. It all is cramped together. It's moved over to another part of the machine, and it's spritzed through with lead. Out comes a line of type, the same formula of lead that was used, we think, since Gutenberg. And then another line, and then the matrices go back to the top of the machine, and each has a unique code in its keys, little teeth in what looks like a mechanical Pac-Man. And when it hits the right pattern, it falls back into the right place. And it recirculates those molds. And that's what Mergenthaler made possible because of these eurekas, because of this moment. And nobody else had thought of that before. So I think that's another lesson for the future.
That's why it's called hot type, because you're literally casting lead, like hot melted lead, into a form, but somehow those forms can be reused, which is actually kind of a remarkable achievement.
Yeah.
It's funny how it all goes back to Gutenberg, because that's one of his principal inventions, right? He came up with the alloy, the unique combination.
We think he did. We can't be
lead
sure.
And antimony and tin to make casting type possible. And what you're also reminding me of is the Marshall McLuhan take on Gutenberg, which is that it's the invention of the assembly line, the original division of labor. And so instead of one scribe at a desk, writing with a quill pen, trying to write out words one letter at a time, you had a typesetter, and you had somebody who was printing pages, and somebody else who was casting type. Those were different jobs. So you had division of labor, even in 1450. Kind of extraordinary. We can't get away from this stuff. It shows you how I guess it shows you how durable a good idea is when we come up with one. We just find new ways to apply that idea.
So what happened? There were the foundries, the people that made the type, and they knew that they were doomed because these machines would come along. So they merged all the foundries in America into one company and moved all of it into Jersey City and closed all the other foundries and just came out with one. And there was still a business for this because people like you in the ad business wanted a special, big, fancy font. You weren't going to get it on Linotype. You still got it from a foundry. And so believe it or not, the foundries lived on and on and on. Mergenthaler had a problem. To try to create each one of these little tiny molds, you had to create a patrix, a punch in the letter, and then punch it into the mold. Those were extremely expensive, rare. There were very few people who knew how to make them. It was going to be wildly expensive. It was going to make the machine economically unviable. But the guy who worked at one of the foundries wanted to create a machine so that he could make type more efficiently. And he did that, and he thus saved the Linotype and doomed his own industry. Now, his own industry continued for decades, and he wasn't bitter about it. He said, I contributed to the world. It's a good thing. And so it was a fascinating little moment. And so that industry finally died a horrible, horrible death in New Jersey. There's a great scene of the last auction of the last crap. And these are beautiful molds for our favorite letters for Century, which is for the Century magazine by one of the most famous type designers. And there were junk men there bidding for this stuff to just melt it down.
Oh, brother, that's sad. Wow.
And so, as you can see me, I'm holding up a matrix here.
Yes.
And it's brass. And I saw these on eBay, and somebody was selling a whole font of these, and he didn't know what it was. He had no idea what it was. And so I bought it just to preserve it because he was going to melt it down.
Wow.
Because that was more valuable than history.
Right. The brass itself is more valuable than all the craftsmanship incorporated into that. It's funny. The foundries live on. The foundries live on. Most people don't realize the reason we use the word font to describe, the letter that we're choosing or the alphabet that we're choosing for a particular document. That word font is connected in the French to fond, which is the basis of foundry, and it refers to melted lead, right? Mm-hmm. That's the principle here. So the companies that melt the lead are also the companies that created the type. They own the typefaces. And when the business of, casting that went away, the typefaces lived on as a licensing business. So there's a thriving licensing business today from the so-called foundries who own all the fonts. But that terminology is from 100 years ago.
Right. So Monotype,
like
which sells most of those today, Monotype was a competitive machine to the Linotype. It made letters letter at a time rather than a line at a time, and it's used. That machine is still used today for people who want to do letterpress printing. It makes the letters for them still, but Monotype is now the licensor for most of the fonts that you want to use. It bought Linotype as part of Monotype. And that's where you get these now. But those were digitized and they were created for online to still be able to use.
So let me make a leap to another idea that's a little bit analogous to what we're describing. So much of what we talked about in this conversation is about the centrality of type to conveying ideas to people and how that was a great leap over script, but then typesetting itself became its own bottleneck. And so that process got mechanized and eventually automated and eventually turned into software. And so now we can do that very quickly, so quickly that as we tap out text on our phone, we don't really realize that there's 500 years of history behind that process. And that's still quite efficient for most things. You know, if you're texting mom to tell her you're going to be home late for dinner or something, it works just fine. But we've also shifted since the advent of mobile video to a different kind of media consumption, which is audiovisual. And you mentioned earlier, people have literacies and that some people are more literate with audiovisual. Certainly more people like to consume it. This baffles me because I find it faster to read than to watch somebody's YouTube video, but most people disagree. Like they would rather watch the video. Maybe that's because it's easier for them to deal with. It's like having a conversation. And I'm thinking one of the consequences of AI is that we're going to start to build digital representations of ourselves. So it's not just my words, you know, my text that I could train Notebook LM on or Gemini Notebook, train that on. That's a great idea for anyone who has a body of literature. They should do that. It's a smart idea. But there's more. You can actually create a virtual Jeff and have a conversation like this. As creepy as that sounds, I think that's almost inevitable, right? So that we can engage with it. My friend Bay Raid, who's been on the show, he's an artist, and he has a very different approach to AI than most artists that I know. He's very positive about AI. He's very enthusiastic. He is very embracing of the fact that it's been trained on all the literature and all the works of humanity. He thinks that's great. He doesn't think that's a bad thing. He doesn't consider it theft. He's like, now I can finally have a conversation with the ancients. I can finally have a discussion. I can engage with the wisdom of the ancients, and I can go as deep as I wish. And if I direct it properly, I could even turn the clock back to 1900 and have a conversation with the intelligence at that time and nothing beyond that. So there's no artifact or an anachronism in that conversation. This is a cool approach. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily agree with all of what Bay says, although I do respect his artistic approach to it because I think he's engaging with it. What he's trying to do is uncover the capabilities there. But where that leads me to is this notion that we have individuals who have great ideas, great insights, great wisdom, great knowledge. One of the ways to convey that at large scale to large numbers of people is to encode it into this artifact, a book, a fixed medium. And you know, then you can sell a bunch of copies. Okay, today people want to watch video, fine. So now people have to develop the skill of being a TikTok influencer or a YouTube video person, fine. So we shifted it from type to audio visual. But ultimately, I think where we're both heading in this conversation is this idea that you can actually train an intelligence on your corpus. And it can be trained on your voice, and it can be trained in your likeness and your expressions. Maybe not today, but soon, right? Soon. I think it's foreseeable that that's going to be quite a lifelike likeness. And I say it's creepy because there is an element of generative AI video that they call the uncanny valley, where it's too close to reality, but it's not quite there. So it's like vaguely disturbing. And the human eye is extremely well developed. It's very well evolved to detect those shortfalls, those glitches. And it's kind of repulsive to us as a result. So they call that the uncanny valley. So what I'm saying right now sounds preposterous if you're stuck in the uncanny valley. But if you share my conviction that we're going to get past that, there's literally thousands of AI engineers right now working on solving that problem. And I mean, sometime soon, years, not decades, you're going to be able to make lifelike representations, synthetic representations of real people, living or dead. All right, I want you to react to that. As a magazine person, as a copy editor, as a historian, is that an extension of what we've been doing? Is that the kind of the next phase of what we're doing, or is that a reversal?
So let me do with one example stupid and then one example smart. The stupid example is that Elon Musk has been going on in his racist rant against the Odyssey, saying it's not historically accurate because a black woman is Helen of Troy, as if you have historically accurate versions of gods.
Yes.
And so
it's called mythology. It's
So
not a
he-
historically accurate version.
he's vowing to use Grok, which I won't do, to make a historically accurate version of the Odyssey. And
Yeah,
the first
it's great.
3 minutes are up online, and it's utter crap. It's utter stupidity. Our human eye, to both the visual and also the dialogue, is ridiculous. It's stupid. So human value still matters. But I also think it's not just about making a representation of one person. I think there's representations of corpora of knowledge and of time that can be useful in ways. I just went through, my wife had a doctor's appointment and we had some questions about it. We went on a Gemini and asked it, and it gave us all kinds of background information. It was really valuable. Samir Arora, I don't know if you ever knew Samir when he was at GLAM and AOL, he's working on a new database for doctors. So my wife went to the doctor and she prompted the doctor. She didn't want to show her the documents because they'll get insulted. She prompted her with a few words from it. It could be this, it could be that. And doctors turned to something that was their equivalent of Gemini and almost read back to her the same material. So there was a useful corpora of data, which a doctor is still judging. The human being is still judging, but it brought the information more quickly. Kevin Kelly wrote an essay last week called "Latent Space as a New Medium." I'm not sure I fully get it. That's the case with Kevin Kelly sometimes. But he's talking about how you take this entirety of all of our text and it's now compressed. The machine doesn't remember it. It compresses it as tokens and vectors among those tokens and the relationships of those, right? So I was asking Leo Laporte, who you met when you were on our Intelligent Machines podcast. I think there's the opportunity for me now I love props, right? I have in my hand a prop, a piece of type, a line of type. What comes next is the first amplifier, a triode tube. I love these props as educational things. So it occurred to me, I could take the condensation of all known human text that's used to train a model, and I could put it in my hand. I could hold it, right? It's just terabytes. It's just a database, right? That's all it is. My point finally is that I think that I want to be able to query that in other ways too. What does that tell us about history? What does that tell us about our collected cliches? What does it tell us about what's missing? What obviously diversity is greatly missing in that. How can we interrogate our own past in a new way? Because we can hold that compressed latent space, as Kevin calls it, in our hand. That has all kinds of. As I'm not a real scholar again. I'm a faker. I got in through the side door. I'm not. I'm learning how to do footnotes late in life. But for the real scholars out there, I think there's tremendous new opportunities to study culture and history and fields within it in new ways that simply were not possible before.
I think that's right.
It's solving medical problems. It's solving math problems. But there's all kinds of other things we haven't even yet imagined.
I think you're right about that. And I think as we get better at using this novel technology, we're going to start to realize we can use it to overcome our own biases. Right now, that's not the case. Right now, people love AI because it flatters you and it reinforces your existing bias. But I think smart people at least, are going to get smart about that. And they're going to say, okay, that's a defect. I got to manage around that. What AI is great at is antagonistic approaches to what you've written. It's one of the best uses of it to say, okay, here's what I've written. You're not writing it. I want you to attack it. And I want you to attack it from these perspectives. You can give it 5 different perspectives or more if you wish. Another way to do that, though, is to say, hey, I'm an American citizen. I was born and raised in this country. And though I've traveled, my understanding of other perspectives is limited. Tell me how you would perceive this from the point of view of someone who was raised in Indonesia or Malaysia or Singapore. That's another radically different perspective, right? So I think this is quite useful for us to get that before you publish, right? Before you print, before you commit it to a fixed form. Jeff, as always, these conversations are so much fun. I want to be respectful of your time and the audience's time. Folks, we'll have Jeff back from time to time because he's always such a good time. Let's talk about your book for 1 second here. So Hot Type is coming out from Bloomsbury Press. It'll be released next month, August 2026. Even though I'm only halfway through, I can tell you it's just so much fun to read something that's actually written by a human being and one who's got such a gift for conveying ideas in such a novel way, such fresh phrases, such nice portraits of each of the historical figures that are in your book. So I recommend it. I don't always do that with every author that I read, but your books I enjoy so tremendously much.
Thank you so much.
Where can people learn more about you? Where can they learn more about you and the book?
So my life is an open blog. If you go to buzzmachine.com or me at Medium, you'll see more than you want to know about me.
Buzzmachine.com.
Buzzmachine.com is my blog, yes. And so next I'm working on a book that I haven't started writing yet on the arc of mass media. So
wow.
It kind of brings it back to that book I wanted to write 15 years ago, and I hope I'm ready now to try to tackle it.
Very
One last point, I did this with Rob before we got on. If you do, God bless you, buy the book or pick it up in a bookstore or a library, it's kind of hidden. Go to the very last page. So the very, very last page is what's called a colophon. Since the days of scribes, people would say this book was written by, and so
it looks like this if you're on YouTube.
So that's a colophon, but you're going to notice the type looks different. That's because I set this on a Linotype with the help of the Museum of Printing in Haverhill, Mass., which is a wonderful place with a great library. They've been very helpful. And so if you ever are in Boston, go up to Haverhill on a Saturday and go see it. There's a printing museum in Southern California. Go there and see a Linotype working. It's a hoot of a machine. It's this Rube Goldberg thing. And now we think a machine is a thing that's in a gray box that hums at us, right? These were machines. This was algorithms in steel. This is something that Ottmar Mergenthaler thought through that stayed essentially the same for 70 years, that he anticipated every action it would need to make and automated that and aided it. And it's just wonderful to see this tribute to a mechanical world before we get into the digital world that we have now.
And so durable, right? These machines were made in a different time when machines were built to last. Folks, I realized I made a blunder in the beginning. I did not properly introduce Jeff. And he's been very humble to say that he's not a proper academic. But let me read your title just because I love reading this academic title. Jeff Jarvis is the Emeritus Leonard Toe Professor of Journalism and Innovation at the City University of New York's Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. He's also a visiting professor at Stony Brook University and a fellow at Montclair State University Center for Cooperative Media. That is a mouthful. But he also is a founder of magazine Entertainment Weekly, which was at one point a super influential publication.
Yeah, rest in peace.
He's a TV critic for TV Guide and People, Sunday editor of the New York Daily News, and a media columnist for The Guardian. So Jeff has a long, storied history in publications, news publications and magazines in particular. He's written elegantly about the magazine as a medium. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so very kindly for joining us again, and good luck with the book launch. And folks who are listening, it's always a pleasure for us to bring these speakers to you, and we'll see you again in the future. Well, that's it for the Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.